And in fact, so last year, I was working very closely with this very senior kind of director at Google, stepping out, was starting up, and this person had a lot of experience, but going through that -1 to 0 ideation kind of phase, I really saw him struggle, right, with kind of how to frame this problem, especially as an engineering leader, right? I mean, this is not unless you have started a company. These are not very instinctive things, right? In terms of, I mean, you can talk to anyone on the planet for most products, right? You'll have so many different kinds of customers. And then at 0 to 1, you're doing so many different kinds of things, right? From the first really early discovery calls or some instinct to, as you said, some people who organically start spending time with you, to real alpha, beta versions, to maybe like a product actually being used regularly by someone, to then eventually a customer, right? So how should founders think about what are these categories of people that either they should look out for or they should expect to encounter, right, in this phase?
Great question. I'm kind of framing an answer for this.
Yeah.
I think the first part is, which is founder has to work in his or her own mind. Like, let's say you and I are starting a company. I think first is our own conviction of what we are building, because your design partner is a practitioner in his or her own industry. So let's say if I'm building a cybersecurity product, I have to be clear that the buyer is a cybersecurity chief, which is a CISO in the industry parlance, and not a CIO. Because if you're trying to recruit a design partner, you're gonna hit on 25, 30 of them, and then probably one or two would take your call and say, yep, this is an interesting problem. So I think the first is me and you or the founders framing it as in, is this person going to buy my product? Which means, is this person having a problem or is his team having a problem? I'll give you my perspective. So when we started Redblock, we were slightly more wider in our thought process. Okay, we're going to do a much larger play of what it is right now. And successively in conversations with the CIO and CISO cohort, both. So we decided to hit both the cohorts. It helped us chisel down saying, no, no, A, you have an AI that is brand new as a technology in the market, especially the language models. B, you are solving a problem in cybersecurity that has not been solved. You're trying to marry these two impossible things together. So you have to really chisel down on a very specific use case. And then you progressively, we found a few early design partners, and then, we're building what we're building now. But a very specific answer to your question is, we had to know what we are trying to solve. We were very open-ended. So the answers that we got were correct from the perspective of the person who we're trying to outreach, but we were not sure if that's the answer we want.
But would you really stick to very specific level of seniority, or would you, let's say, if there is a more kind of a more younger junior developer, right, who's still a great person to have, who might be a user of the product, is not necessarily the buyer, right? Would you spend time kind of talking to people up and down the organization, or would you really first hone in on, okay, this is exactly the kind of person that I need to speak to, and it could be from a title perspective or from a functional perspective?
You want to speak both up and down. So let's say if your developer is the ultimate user of the product, so definitely yes. But let's say he's a user of the product, but he will never pay for this. His boss is going to pay for this. Then you want to talk to the boss as well. So in our case in cybersecurity, it's always the boss who has the purse, who's going to control the dollars, and probably the boss -1 or -2 who's actually going to use the product and has the problem. So you want to talk both up or down. And many times the senior person would have that deep insight, and he or she is very hands-on, and they will give you this feedback saying, okay, I know this problem exists, but let me introduce you to Jacob, who actually does this on a daily basis. And that is a good marriage to have.
Yeah, I remember there was an event where the CIO of Medallia was saying that, look, all the early stage founders really focus so much of time to get to me, right? But what they don't realize is that I just basically go by what my team is saying. So,
Yeah.
if the execution team is coming up and saying, look, we love this product, I'm using it, we got to pay for it, we got to buy it, then I'm not going to like question it beyond a certain point. But the amount of effort that it takes to, get a meeting and crack a CIO medallia, so it was like an interesting, and these are the trade-offs, right? And especially with limited resources that a very early stage founder faces.
Absolutely trade-off. But you still want to talk to the CISO because, at least in cybersecurity, for example, or the Medallia CIO if you're building an IT product, because he'll also have a macro picture of whether, let's say you're selling a 30K ACV product, he'll have a macro picture whether this 30K ACV product will fit in his top five priorities for next couple of quarters or not. So you want to have that unique insight because if you're planning to fundraise, the first thing your investor is going to ask is, who do you talk to? Now, I hate to say this, unfortunately, if you don't give a name of the Medallia CIO in your update to the investor, they would not care if you are talking to a junior developer.